Imagine a killer roaming free for over a decade, taunting police, mocking justice. His victims, young women, sex workers, were discarded like trash on the side of a desolate highway. But the true horror isn't just in the murders, it's in the lost opportunities for justice, the failure of those meant to protect. This is the Gilgo Beach case, and it's about much more than one man. It's about how a broken system allowed evil to thrive. In this video, we'll dive deep into the case of the Long Island serial killer, a chilling story of police corruption, investigative failures, and a killer who almost got away forever. For over a decade, the police dismissed warnings, failed to follow up on leads, and ignored vital evidence, all while the body count grew. The victims, discarded and forgotten, were seen as expendable, their lives overshadowed by stigma and indifference. How could a killer operate with such impunity in one of the busiest areas in America? And how did it take so long for anyone to even start asking the right questions? This case isn't just about the evil of one man. It's about how the system itself allowed this darkness to spread, unchecked. Stay with us as we uncover the truth, the failures, the cover-ups, and the heart-stopping discoveries that only came too late. If you think you know the Gilgo Beach case, think again. But first, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the shocking twists in this real-life mystery. We'll be diving into the details that most people won't even dare to ask. This is just the beginning. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more exclusive, mind-blowing details about one of the most haunting cases in modern history. Let's uncover the truth together. The story begins in May 2010, when a young woman named Shannon Gilbert vanished into the darkness. Her 911 call is the stuff of nightmares, a frantic plea for help, claiming someone was trying to kill her. "They're trying to kill me. Please help me." The call ends abruptly, leaving behind a chilling sense of dread. And yet, despite the urgency, police would only act months later. When they finally began searching for Shannon, they didn't find her. Instead, they discovered the first body. But it wasn't Shannon. It was a woman wrapped in burlap. That first victim was just the beginning of what would become one of the most unsettling serial murder cases in American history. That single discovery led to the revelation of not one victim, but many. Over the next several months, police unearthed a staggering 10 victims in total, all women discarded along a desolate stretch of highway near Gilgo Beach, a location that would become synonymous with terror. The bodies were positioned in disturbing, almost ritualistic ways, suggesting a cold, calculated killer. But it wasn't just the method of murder that sent shockwaves through the community. It was the fact that for so long, this killer had evaded capture, operating in plain sight. What happened next was as troubling as the discovery itself. For months, police failed to connect the dots, and the case continued to slip through their fingers. The first 4 victims were found close to each other, all women in their 20s. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Amber Costello, Megan Waterman, and Melissa Barthélemy. Each of these women had their own story, their own life, yet all were found in eerily similar conditions. They were wrapped in burlap sacks, discarded like trash along the desolate stretch of Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach. The consistency in how they were found, and the manner of their deaths, pointed to the likelihood that a single killer was responsible. But this wasn't just a one-off discovery. As investigators dug deeper, more bodies were unearthed, suggesting that this killer didn't just stop with 4 victims. More bodies were discovered in other nearby areas, leading to a disturbing theory. Was there more than one killer at work here? Some investigators even speculated that perhaps multiple killers had been using the same dumping ground. However, police didn't want to entertain that possibility. They kept dismissing the idea of multiple perpetrators and focused on the notion of a single serial killer, a theory that would dominate the investigation for years. The problem was, as the bodies kept piling up, the police couldn't pinpoint the killer. The more they searched, the more questions arose. And the bigger the fear grew that the killer was still out there, unchallenged, perhaps even watching the investigation unfold from the shadows. At this point, the nightmare was just beginning, and the search for justice was far from over. The investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders didn't just stall, it sputtered, stagnated, and became a nightmare of missed opportunities. It wasn't until months after Shannon Gilbert's disappearance in May 2010 that police even began to treat the case seriously. In the initial stages, Shannon's 911 call, a desperate plea for help, was brushed aside as nothing more than the typical troubles of a sex worker. Police presumed she was simply another woman who had gone off the grid, abandoning her life voluntarily, and wrote her off as a runaway. The tragic irony here is staggering. Shannon Gilbert's 911 call was the first real clue that something was terribly wrong. She was scared for her life, talking frantically about someone trying to kill her. This wasn't just a moment of panic. This was a cry for help from a woman who was unknowingly near the precipice of being another victim. Yet instead of acting immediately, the police delayed their search. The first full investigation wasn't launched until several months later, when the police belatedly got around to searching the area around Gilgo Beach. By then, critical evidence had already been missed. The delay meant that potential clues from Shannon's final moments, like possible DNA or items she may have dropped, couldn't be preserved. And tragically, the investigation wasn't just delayed for Shannon. It was plagued by slow responses and dismissive attitudes toward the actual victims of the Gilgo Beach killings. When the police did finally discover the first body, it was of a woman wrapped in burlap. But it was only after a frantic and lengthy investigation that they realized that this murder wasn't an isolated incident. More bodies began to surface, but police didn't make the connection between the killings early enough. Each time a new body was found, it raised the question: how many lives could have been saved if law enforcement had acted quickly and properly in the early days? These were not just errors in procedure, they were missed chances that cost lives. The police failed to piece together the bigger picture in the early stages, leaving victims vulnerable to a killer who for over a decade was allowed to continue his horrifying reign of terror. As if the missteps and delays weren't damaging enough, the investigation was further derailed by a man at the top, Suffolk County Police Chief Jimmy Burke. From the moment he took charge of the investigation, the case seemed more about preserving his own reputation than solving brutal murders. Burke's handling of the case wasn't just incompetent, it was complicit. Burke's response to the Gilgo Beach murders was nothing short of disastrous. His first major failure came when he blocked the FBI from helping with the investigation. While the FBI had invaluable experience dealing with serial killers and complex criminal cases, Burke's pride and ego stood in the way of what could have been a crucial partnership. The FBI was left out of the investigation for years, and this decision allowed the case to stagnate. Without the federal resources and expertise, Suffolk County Police were simply not equipped to handle a case of this magnitude. But Burke's failures didn't stop there. As the bodies continued to pile up, he made derogatory comments about the victims, referring to them as misdemeanor murders. Can you imagine? Women were dead, their lives discarded like trash, and the head of law enforcement reduced their murders to a punchline, showing just how little respect he had for the victims. For Burke, these women were nothing more than a statistic, mere casualties in the war on sex work. His lack of empathy became a blatant barrier in the investigation, because the message was clear: these women didn't matter. He didn't prioritize the case, and the investigation languished, with leads ignored and evidence left to gather dust. It wasn't just his attitude that caused problems, it was his actions. While the case went cold, Burke was busy protecting his own image and covering up his own criminal behavior. In 2012, it was revealed that Burke had been involved in a disturbing scandal that could only be described as corruption at its worst. In a bizarre and shocking turn of events, Burke had covered up a theft from his own car, a duffel bag filled with sex toys and pornography. A petty thief had stolen it, and Burke's response wasn't to follow the law, but to threaten, intimidate, and violently beat the thief into silence. He even ordered his subordinates to cover up the crime, setting a dangerous precedent in the Department for Corruption and Lawlessness. This incident was just the beginning of what would eventually become Burke's downfall. But what's even more chilling is that his corruption may have played a direct role in the Gilgo Beach investigation's failure. Did Burke's ego, arrogance, and the scandal surrounding him lead to unwillingness to confront the truth? Did he actively obstruct the investigation, either to avoid embarrassment or because he simply didn't care about the victims' lives? Eventually, Burke's criminal activities were exposed, leading to his conviction for civil rights violations and obstruction of justice, with a prison sentence to follow. But by then, the damage was done. The investigation was already so severely damaged that it would take years for anyone to begin looking at the case with fresh eyes and a renewed focus. We may never know the full extent of Burke's involvement in the cover-up of the Gilgo Beach murders. Was he complicit? Did his inaction and corruption allow the killer to operate with impunity, or was it simply a matter of neglect? What we do know is this: his indifference, his refusal to cooperate, and his blatant disregard for the victims' lives made the case harder to solve and allowed the killer to continue his rampage. Burke's scandal was ultimately just another layer of corruption that undermined the investigation, ensuring that the killer was never brought to justice, while the victims remained forgotten by the very people who were supposed to protect them. But even after Burke's conviction, the damage was done. The investigation had been fractured, divided, and ultimately stalled for years. It took a new task force and fresh eyes to begin piecing the case back together, and it was only after Burke's departure that a new sense of urgency was brought to solving this case. The killer had a head start, and the victims paid the price. In the next segment, we'll dive deeper into how the investigation finally moved forward, but before we do, ask yourself, if it weren't for police corruption, would this killer have been stopped sooner? Would those women still be alive? As the bodies continued to pile up, investigators were left with a chilling mystery. Who was behind the deaths of these women? What kind of person could carry out such brutal, methodical murders without leaving a trace? And most disturbingly, how could this killer remain free for so long without anyone suspecting a thing? In the early stages, criminal profilers began crafting a profile of the killer based on the pattern of the murders and the evidence found at the scenes. Initially, investigators believed the killer was likely a white male, aged somewhere between his 30s to 40s. He was familiar with the area, particularly the desolate stretch of land near Gilgo Beach, and had the ability to blend in with his surroundings. This was not a disorganized killer, but someone highly organized, methodical in his approach. One of the most telling aspects of the murders was the way the victims were treated after their deaths. The killer didn't just leave them to rot, he wrapped them in burlap sacks, a pattern that was both calculated and personal. This was a detail that suggested a level of planning and control over the crime. The burlap sacks, often used in agricultural settings, were not only a tool to hide the bodies, but also represented a signature move of the killer. It was clear this was a man who wanted to maintain control over every aspect of his victims' lives, even after they were dead. Investigators also considered the possibility that there could be multiple killers operating in the same area, which is not uncommon in serial killings. The idea was based on the variation in the crimes. The bodies were found in different positions, some dismembered, others still intact, but this theory was quickly dismissed, as the profiles seemed to indicate a single consistent pattern across all the murders. The killer was clearly highly organized, someone who thought about every step of the process, from the way he disposed of the bodies to the way he taunted the families of his victims. With the theory of multiple killers rejected, law enforcement began to focus on the idea of a single perpetrator. This was crucial when in 2023, a suspect would finally emerge, and everything police had learned about the killer's characteristics would play a role in identifying him. What made this killer stand out was not just his method of murder, but his confidence, his ability to manipulate, and his sheer sadism. This wasn't a killer who simply killed and left. This was a predator who thrived on psychological control and power. One of the most chilling aspects of the Gilgo Beach murders was the killer's ability to interact with his victims even after their deaths. It wasn't just the act of murder that gave him satisfaction, it was the fear, the control, and the sadistic joy he took in making the families of his victims suffer. In one of the most disturbing cases, the sister of Melissa Barthelemy, Amanda, received multiple phone calls from the killer. In these calls, the killer taunted Amanda, mocking her sister's death, revealing the most gruesome details of the murder, details that only the killer could have known. The killer didn't just kill and run, he wanted to make sure the families of his victims suffered. He wanted them to know that he was still out there, watching, taunting, and mocking their grief. The phone calls were not just a way to hurt the families, they were a form of psychological warfare, meant to extend his control even after the act of murder. This sadistic behavior gave law enforcement valuable insight into the killer's psyche. The killer thrived on fear, not just from his victims, but from everyone around him. He wanted to show the world that he was untouchable, that no matter how hard the police tried, they would never catch him. He was confident that he could outsmart them, and this confidence was matched by a meticulous nature. His ability to remain hidden, to blend into his surroundings, to plan each murder, and to cover his tracks made him all the more terrifying. But this also provided crucial insight into who he might be. Law enforcement knew they were dealing with a killer who was methodical, controlled, and above all, extremely dangerous. The phone calls were key. They were a window into his mind, offering clues that would eventually help investigators piece together a psychological profile of the killer. But this didn't stop the police from missing critical evidence for years, and in the meantime, the killer continued to terrorize Long Island. Despite all the clues, the killer remained elusive. His cold, calculated behavior and psychological games kept him one step ahead of the police, allowing him to remain free for years. Now, with the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together, police were closer than ever to uncovering the truth. But at what cost? The families of the victims had to endure years of not knowing who was responsible for their loved ones' deaths, and the killer, for all his confidence, was running out of time. In 2023, after more than a decade of dead ends, false leads, and a case that seemed to have gone cold, the unimaginable happened. Police arrested Rex Heuermann, a 59-year-old architect from Massapequa Park, Long Island. At first glance, Heuermann appeared to be just another ordinary suburban dad, a man with a family, a steady job, and a life that seemed far removed from the horrors of the Gilgo Beach murders. He lived in a well-kept house, worked as a respected professional, and was known in the community for being friendly and unremarkable. But the life he had so carefully built was about to come crashing down in the most terrifying way imaginable. Beneath that ordinary exterior was a man who had been living a double life, one that had allowed him to commit brutal murders and evade capture for over a decade. He was, in fact, the man responsible for one of the most chilling killing sprees in modern history. For years, he had eluded law enforcement, slipping through the cracks of a broken investigation. But in 2023, after years of frustration, the breakthrough finally came, and it led to Heuermann's arrest. Heuermann's story is a haunting reminder of just how well some killers can hide in plain sight, how they can blend into society unnoticed, even as they leave a trail of destruction and terror. It's a story of how one man's calculated confidence kept him free for so long, but more importantly, it's a story of justice finally being served, thanks to a relentless pursuit of the truth. The breakthrough in the case didn't come from a dramatic confession or a slip-up in Heuermann's behavior. It came from the painstaking re-examination of old evidence that had been sitting untouched for years. Investigators began looking at evidence that had been overlooked in the past, including a Chevy Avalanche seen near the scene of one of the victims' disappearances. This was a vehicle witnesses had described back in 2010, but had not been fully investigated. This seemingly small lead turned out to be the key that would eventually unlock the case. Using cell phone records, investigators were able to track Heuermann's phone activity and link it to the victims. The phones used by the victims to make calls, including the burner phones used to arrange their meetings, were all pinging off the same cell towers near Heuermann's home in Massapequa Park. This was a game changer. For the first time, police had definitive proof that Heuermann had been in the area when the victims were alive and when their bodies were disposed of. It was a shocking revelation. How could this seemingly average man be so close to the murders, yet remain unnoticed for so long? But it didn't stop there. Investigators dug deeper and found that Heuermann had searched online for details about the Gilgo Beach victims, searches for their names, their stories, and even news articles about the case. This chilling sign of obsession made it clear that Heuermann was not just involved in these crimes passively, he was deeply engaged, perhaps even fascinated by the investigation. He was watching the case unfold, following the police efforts and knowing full well that he was eluding capture. Yet despite these mounting pieces of evidence, Heuermann denied any involvement in the murders. Even when it was clear that the walls were closing in, he continued to profess his innocence. But the final nail in the coffin came when investigators took a new approach to collecting DNA evidence. In a move that would ultimately seal his fate, investigators used Heuermann's family's trash, his discarded items, to gather DNA samples. And to everyone's shock, they found a 99.96% mitochondrial DNA match between hair found on one of the victim's burlap sacks and Heuermann's DNA. This breakthrough proved beyond a doubt that Heuermann had been directly involved in the murders. It was a stunning moment for the investigators, who had spent years chasing dead ends and unanswered questions. They had finally found the killer, and all it took was one final push, using discarded DNA evidence, to make the connection. As the evidence mounted, police moved quickly to arrest Rex Heuermann in July 2023. His arrest wasn't just the culmination of years of painstaking work and mounting frustration. It was a stunning reminder of how close the killer had come to getting away with everything. Had Heuermann not been caught, it's possible that the case could have gone unsolved forever, just like so many other serial killer cases that remain buried in history. But there's something even more chilling about Heuermann's story. He was not just an architect, he was a father, a husband, a respected member of his community. He had been hiding in plain sight, evading suspicion because he was able to craft an image of normalcy. His arrest came as a shocking revelation to everyone who knew him. For years he had played the role of a loving father, a hard-working professional, while committing unspeakable acts of violence. His dual life, one of respectability and one of terror, made him the ultimate predator, a man who was able to live a double life, deceive those around him, and continue killing without being caught. Yet even with the arrest, there are still many unanswered questions. Why did Heuermann kill these women? What drove him to commit such horrific crimes? How did he manage to evade capture for so long? As the case moves toward trial, these questions remain unanswered, and they will likely continue to haunt the victims' families, as well as the investigators who worked tirelessly to solve the case. For now, Heuermann sits in custody, charged with the murders of at least 3 women, but there are many who believe he could be responsible for more. Could there be more victims? Was Heuermann just one part of a larger network of killers, or was he working alone? As the investigation continues, it's likely that more chilling details will emerge, and the true nature of Rex Heuermann's hidden life will continue to unfold. But one thing is for sure, the truth is out now. After years of police failures and dead ends, justice is finally on the horizon, and the man responsible for these horrific crimes will finally face the consequences of his actions. As with all high-profile cases, especially one as complex and chilling as the Gilgo Beach murders, conspiracy theories and speculation have flourished in the years following the discovery of the bodies. One of the most talked-about theories is that law enforcement itself might have been involved in a cover-up. Could the killer's identity have been hidden intentionally to protect someone with ties to the police or local power structures? It's a question that many have raised over the years, especially given the delays in action and the mishandling of key evidence. Some even wondered whether Rex Heuermann's arrest was too convenient, a way to close the case and move on.
Could this be a case of law enforcement targeting an easy suspect in order to close a chapter that had been left open for far too long? Is Heuermann really the sole perpetrator, or could there be other killers operating in the same area, perhaps with a deeper connection to local institutions? The possibility that Heuermann could have been used as a scapegoat for something more extensive continues to circulate in both mainstream and fringe discussions. As Heuermann's trial looms, theories about his role in a larger web of crimes only continue to spread. Was he just one cog in a much larger criminal operation, or was he the only one pulling the strings? The mystery surrounding the Gilgo Beach murders is far from over. If anything, Heuermann's arrest has only complicated the story, opening more questions than answers, particularly about whether this case is truly closed, or if we're only seeing the beginning of something even darker. Was Heuermann operating alone, or is there more to the story than we realize? Even as the pieces of the puzzle begin to come together, there is one lingering question that continues to haunt the case. Could the killer have been caught earlier if police had acted sooner? What if law enforcement had been more proactive in the early stages of the investigation? Would the killer have been stopped in his tracks before the bodies started piling up along the desolate highway? The uncomfortable truth is that, had the police prioritized this case from the beginning, many victims could have been spared. The slow response, the missed opportunities, and the lack of urgency in the early days allowed a killer to operate with impunity. If only law enforcement had connected the dots sooner, could this tragedy have been prevented? These are questions that linger in the back of our minds as we wait for the trial, and they are questions that will likely never be answered. As the case moves forward, we're left with the unsettling reality that justice came far too late for some, and for others, it may never come at all. The Gilgo Beach case is not just about a serial killer or a failed investigation. It's about a flawed system, one that allowed a predator to roam free for far too long. It's a story of police missteps, corruption, and a broken justice system that allowed a man to hide in plain sight for years. Even as we finally know the name of the alleged killer, Rex Heuermann, the case remains unfinished. There are still so many questions that remain unanswered, and there are truths that may never be fully uncovered. Was Heuermann truly the only one responsible, or is there more to this story that hasn't come to light? And perhaps most chilling of all, how many lives could have been saved if justice had been pursued more aggressively from the very beginning? This case continues to haunt, not just because of the horrors inflicted on the victims, but because it exposes just how deeply flaws in the system can allow a predator to thrive. The full truth may still be out of reach, but it's clear that the journey for justice is far from over. So what do you think? Was Rex Heuermann the sole perpetrator, or do you believe there's more to this story than we know? And what about the role of police corruption? Did it contribute to prolonging the killings and allowing a killer to evade justice? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop your theories and opinions in the comments below. This is a case that's still shrouded in mystery, and together we can uncover the hidden layers of this haunting story. If you want to stay updated on this case as new developments unfold, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Like this video if you want to see more deep dives into real-life mysteries, and don't forget to share your thoughts and theories below. The truth is out there, and we're determined to find it together. Join the conversation. Let's uncover it all, one step at a time.